Just a question. So kind of to what you just were saying there, if at the end of today we feel comfortable making a recommendation on, let's say, moving forward with the lease, are we in position to make recommendations about certain conditions or certain things that we think should be considered, or no?
No, our objective and our charge as this is to review the RFP against the criteria and determine, to rank them, to make an ultimate determination, and come to a consensus if we can today. Again, like I said, if we cannot come to consensus today, then we would have to schedule another meeting and have a discussion at that point. Again, post the meeting and have a discussion like this. And it's possible that people may want to take a little bit of time after everybody's talked and think about it a little bit more. I'm not sure, but if we do feel we can come to consensus, Tucker, it would only be on whether to recommend to the select board that they enter into negotiations or for award to the respondent, the Nantucket Hunting Association, to enter into a lease agreement for the property, relative to conditions or anything we think should be considered. I don't think that is really within the purview or of the criteria or objective that we're charged with.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question with respect to the minimum criteria. I just have one question, and that was with respect to the evidence of insurance. And it's not in my area of expertise, but when I took a look at the policy in Exhibit or Schedule G or whichever it is, it wasn't clear to me that it extended to all of the proposed activities of the hunting club, as opposed to the skeet shoot, which was the entity that was in fact providing the policy coverage. So it was just a question of clarification. I know that with respect to that activity, it was fully covered, but I wasn't sure that the nature of the insurance requirement was whether or not it was respect to all of the activities that would be covered, that were necessarily covered under insurance.
Okay, well, we can certainly, I'm actually looking at it as we speak, because I had to go back and look at it. So, well, if that is a question, then maybe it is that we can't make a determination today, and if we need additional clarification on this, and that if we do, then I think that also means that I would most likely have to go to our insurance consultant to have them review it to insure it. But I think we can continue with the review, Ken, and I'll keep looking into this as we go.
Yep.
Okay. Because I do believe that the requirements on here are met. I guess as your question is more related to, does it cover the entire activity, which we may need clarification on, because when I look at it, I do believe it meets the requirements as listed in the RFP.
Okay, that answers my question.
Okay. Okay, so there's really no formal process here. We start with the comparative criteria number 1, which is proposer experience and capacity. We'll give each individual here the opportunity to identify which ranking they gave them, and if they want to expand upon it, they're certainly entitled to. As I mentioned, you would be required to put your rationale in the box relative to each ranking on the ranking sheet anyway, but if you feel like you would like to expound or offer more rationale for it, it's certainly something you can do as well. So randomly we can start. Ken, how about you go first with this one? So this was the proposer experience and capacity for the project.
Who's supposed to go first?
Yeah, if you want to, or
no, I would just.
Yeah. So you would just explain the ranking. Did you rate it highly advantageous, advantageous, or not acceptable?
Well, my problem is that I ranked it between advantageous and not acceptable, somewhere between 1 and 2, because of the fact that they have had experience in development of this particular shooting park. Some discussion, some experience with legal design, environmental and management and development management experience, because they've done a lot of the environmental work. But with respect to the financing, I found that was not as strong a long suit as I would have hoped. And that's why I put it somewhere between advantageous and not acceptable. Because in fact, when I took a look at their references, one area of expertise that they didn't show as a reference was financing.
Tucker, you want to go next?
Sure. So, I mean, I take a pretty broad view or interpretation of the descriptions, and I would place them in the highly advantageous category with, and this is sort of where my initial question was getting to, like to the extent that I expect they would be working with folks in the final implementation that had built one of these in another location. That's just sort of something I'd want to clarify, but I think this is a very capable team of people.
Okay. I actually, after reviewing it, I fell on advantageous. I think that there's been a significant amount of work done by a lot of the people relative to Nantucket and the shooting park proposal for Nantucket. It was difficult for me really to understand how much in terms of legal work and other areas that they had experience in other places, but I felt that they did have experience in the development of a shooting park, which landed them for me in advantageous, given the work that they've done for this project over the years already. Rick or the chief, whoever wants to jump in next.
There you go. I rated him like a strong advantageous. I kind of felt like, while if you read the exact definition as Ken did, you would probably land where the way Ken marked it. But I kind of felt like the other side of that is, this is a group of people who have been sort of 15 years in the making on this, and they've had lots of time to learn, consider, take into account public's perception of this and experience with public outreach and planning for this actual site. So I kind of feel like it's a, from a completely legal reading of the language, I kind of with Ken, but when I think about it sort of with a little bit of a subjective lens, I think it's a very qualified group to be able to do this. Oh, so I rated them strong advantageous.
So I rated them as advantageous. And the only reason I did that is because of this team, oh, excuse me, trying to eat my lunch. This team has not developed a shooting park before, but that being said, I think the components and the principles involved are each pretty experienced in major projects, major commercial projects, development, things like that. And these shooting parks are not very complicated projects. So, and as for the financing, I too noticed that they didn't have that in there, other than if they were relying on Judy, whatever her last name is, Wodasinski or something. She's got a lot of alumni association, a lot of fundraising experience through those different jobs she's had. Whether fundraising equates to financing experience, I don't know, but I'd call them advantageous.
myself off mute. Okay, so then the next one that we need to go through is, and actually I need to do one other thing here. Let me start this. Let me do this new. And work. Chief. Tucker, what did you have them again for number one? I just got.
I put them in highly advantageous.
And my rating then ends up being inadvantageous.
Okay. Rick, I don't know that we can go between the two, so I think.
I just make mine advantageous. Then.
Okay, perfect. Okay. All right. So number two is the site design for the proposal. So I'll look to whoever wants to jump in first.
I'll start this one.
Yep.
I think this one, I gave them a highly advantageous, and it's primarily because I've been around a lot of shooting parks and ranges and different things, and the design of this one, given the parameters of what the topography out there, I think is very, very good. And they've had 15 years to address many of the complaints and issues that have been brought against the park or voiced by residents nearby, members of the community, et cetera, the courts, everything else. And I think, you know, this is not my first shooting park proposal I've ever seen. I was actually years ago in my other city involved in one, and this was far more extensive than that project ever was. And I think at this point they've been given the direction, they've demonstrated they know which way to go. It's only up to them to fail at this point on any of these site design issues. So they're highly advantageous, I think.
Rick, Tucker, Ken, anybody?
Rated them highly advantageous, just more as much on the comprehensiveness, if that's a word, of the plan, and it seemed to have taken into account baffling and backstops and bullet traps, but I've never been to a gun range in my life, so I'm kind of just relying on the fact that it's reasonably comprehensive and well, it's reasonably comprehensive in the documentation. So,
I rated them advantageous as opposed to highly advantageous for the simple reason that I felt that there was not in the design clarity with respect to what would happen with the indoor facility if and when it moved forward. Otherwise, they would have had a highly advantageous rating from me for all the reasons previously discussed. But because of the fact that there was not clarity relative to how that would be dealt with, because part of their presentation talks about it being in phase 4 or phase 5, I thought that just took a little bit away from the site design from my point of view. But it was a very, very high advantageous. Thank you.
I rated it highly advantageous, similar, for reasons similar to what the chief was saying. And I mean, I thought they did talk some about where certain aspects of the indoor would exist if they were to end up going that route. So highly advantageous.
So I'd also ranked him highly advantageous. I thought that the site design was thoughtful, and I think they took into account a lot of the stuff that was in here. I think that probably over the years that they've been at this, they've already gleaned is important to the area. I do somewhat agree with Ken that it was a little bit cloudy on the indoor range piece, but I think overall, with everything else that was taken into account with the site design, I think that it was deserving of the highly advantageous. Okay. So let's see, we are on to number 3, which is building and improvements design. Let me go to the criteria as we go. So we are looking at this category includes construction of the indoor shooting range and outdoor facilities, the completion of construction within 5 years, and then a couple of it being the design is cost effective with quality materials, management office on site with storage, and exterior design and materials of level of quality suitable for these recreational purposes. So who wants to throw their hat in first for this one?
I'll go.
Okay.
This is one where I gave them a highly advantageous, but virtually everything that is listed here is outside of their control, except for buying and purchasing of quality materials. Because the HDC or the permitting organizations are going to have a huge say in this facility, in the final design. For instance, I just as kind of a joke, we were joking over here when we were talking about the indoor shooting range portion of it. We can see the HDC wanting them to put windows in that building. Windows don't work in an indoor shooting range. So, it's going to be, and that being said, they may have to incorporate into their final design some way to mitigate that requirement or make them safe type thing. So, I think given the challenges of building on Nantucket, HTC and everything else, I think and the plan that looks good, looks consistent with what we would expect on Nantucket. And I think I gave them an HA, highly advantageous.
I actually gave them an advantageous on this. And the only reason that I really did the advantageous was because it was really, for me, in the proposal, it was a little unclear whether everything would be able to be done in the first 5 years, as outlined for a highly advantageous. So I looked at the timeline and I read through it and tried to think about, construction on the island, and there was nothing that I could see, and somebody could correct me if I'm wrong, I may have missed it, but there was nothing in here definitive other than this potential timeline that they have that really made me feel like everything would be completed in with the first 5 years. And I think there was kind of a question about the financing, and there is some fundraising that they need to do. And so with all those things being considered, I gleaned from this that I thought that it was most likely advantageous, given that I thought it most likely, based on what they proposed, would be fully completed within 5 to 10 years.
Those are the same reasons that I rated them advantageous as well.
Likewise.
And I'm the same. The timetable put it in advantageous for me.
Right. So hold on one second while I go through and map through and do the compilation here. Everybody after. Okay, so we have financial feasibility is next, number 4. And just in case nobody has it up, I'll just kind of run through it. In this review, we're looking at adequacy of proposed budget for the development and operation, appropriateness of membership fees, track record of securing proposed financing, fundraising efforts to supplement financing. So again, I'll start. I felt like this proposal really, to me, fell in the advantageous category. I think that, I can honestly say I have not really been involved in operating budgets for a shooting range, but from the review that I could see, it does certainly seemed realistic. I think that the fundraising and donation part, I think was a little bit of an uncertainty for me. I think that there probably most likely will be fundraising and donations that will help do this. And I think that they will have the ability to secure the necessary funding. But I don't think that it really, it didn't, for me, when I was reviewing it in the documentation, didn't rise to highly advantageous. It was definitely an advantageous proposal, but it didn't rise to that high level.
For me, it was also in the advantageous range. And the principal reason for that was that it didn't have, from my point of view, a plan to meet with the neighbors to try to get a better handle on the fundraising with respect to their contribution to the overall plan, as well as, more importantly, to the indoor plan. But the fact is that I thought it was an advantageous proposal, but it didn't qualify for the highly advantageous.
Perfect.
I put advantageous for many of the reasons already spoken, but my biggest concern here is what I see as their operating budget, I think is reasonable for a facility like this. They're not that difficult to run, but where I think they're going to have some uncertainty is going to be in the development side of it, given the current economic conditions and the drastically increased cost of construction here on this island. I actually would have probably made them a weak advantageous on this one, just because they really didn't show that, how they were going to overcome that.
Rick, Tucker?
I also had them in the advantageous category for several of the reasons that have already been cited. I mean, one of the things that I wonder about just on the usage revenue is whether ultimately the hours, particularly during the season, will end up being as proposed if they are in negotiation, if you will, with the neighbors on potentially funding the indoor portion of this.
Yeah, I can't, it's a little bit, it's tricky. I guess what I'd say is when I look at the year one versus the year 21 income statement, the revenues don't go up that much considering it's 21 years. If you think about the value of money. In fact, $96,000 in 21 years is probably worth less than $60,000 is today. So it seems that they've managed to keep the expenses at a reasonable level such that they're not highly dependent on, having 3 times the admission fees or the range fees, or 4 times in 20 years. So assuming the initial expectations, which are, of course, should be a little bit easier to predict, are reasonably accurate, I think it's okay. I rated it advantageous just because of the unknowns of that.
Chief, I had made a note that I wanted to ask you when we were doing this. When you were looking at this, I mean, does the demand and usage look based on your knowledge, and I think you probably have a little bit more of this, does it look reasonable?
I think they've underestimated it, actually.
Okay.
If you look at the number of permitted people here on the island, and there's just a lot of folks didn't want to get involved in the debate of the building of it. I think they're going to have some things. And just so the people know, these types of facilities depend hugely on membership, volunteering time to do a lot of the things that others would pay money for. So,
Right. So, I mean, if I'm understanding you correctly too, though, in your opinion, probably the actual usage that they would get and the fees they would collect is probably a little bit on the lower side based on what we think might be the demand.
I think they'll at least get what they
Okay.
what they're projecting.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Now on to the safety, mitigation, and business plans. And I'll just kind of read off because this one was pretty extensive. Proposal contains safety plan, including safety training and equipment, environmental stewardship plan, habitat management plan, and funding of requisite escrow with NHESP, lead testing and remediation, a plan of services, and plan for operations and maintenance.
I could start this one. I think I gave them a highly advantageous on this one, mainly because of one point. Their strong point, I don't think, was the environmental stewardship plan, but I'm not an expert on environmental stewardship. But I can say their range safety plan and their range maintenance plans were top notch. as far as ranges go. And it exceeds what I'm sure if this was an NRA sponsored facility, which are considered the best, I'm sure based on what I could see, their safety plan exceeds the NRA general standards. So as far as the stewardship of and the habitat and stuff, I'm not an expert in that, but they did have a plan, and I can assume they worked with somebody who knows what they're talking about in that area when they put it together. So I gave them an HA, highly advantageous.
I rated it advantageous without sort of, obviously any of the background that the Chief Pittman has, but simply from the fact that it seemed to me that if I tick through each of these items, they do exist in the plan, and as I read them in the plan, they seem to be comprehensive, but again, layperson reading it, so.
I gave it an advantageous too, for a lot of the same reasons as Rick. When I was reading it, it certainly, to me, met all the criteria for advantageous and hit all the check boxes. I will say I probably didn't have all of the benefit of the chief's wisdom in going through it, but I think it certainly meets the advantageous and is a plan that will meet the requirements of the RFP.
I was debating between highly advantageous and advantageous, and I ended up rating advantageous. And just with respect to the chief's comments, because I worked with him over the last couple of years with respect to the environmental plan and the consultants that they used and the work that they did over the time, was we really finally over that period of time identified the real issues there, and there is a plan as to how it gets implemented. That's a different story, but there is a very good plan, and the issues necessary have been clearly identified. So I gave it an advantageous.
Yeah, I also gave it an advantageous.
Okay, so that is the individual reviews. Okay, and I'll just, if you don't mind, I'll read them all off to each of you just to make sure individually. I'll go through everyone's rankings and just confirm that I have this right as we go through the next step. Can I actually have you in criterion 1 through 5 as all advantageous?
Yes.
Rick, in criterion 1 through 5, I have you as advantageous with the exception of criterion number 2 having highly advantageous.
Yep.
Okay. Tucker, in criterion 1 through 5, I have criteria 1 and 2 as highly advantageous and 3, 4, and 5 as advantageous.
That's correct.
Chief, I have criteria 1 and 4 as advantageous for you and criteria 2, 3, and 5 marked as highly advantageous.
Yes.
And for Brian, criteria number 2 is highly advantageous and 1, 3, 4, and 5 are all advantageous. So what we need to do now is everybody has to make a determination on their final overall ranking of the entire plan as a whole. And we have to make a comment on that, and then we will have a discussion on whether there's a consensus to make a recommendation or whether we need some more time to review our notes and take any offerings from any of the other people involved in the ranking process. I'll start, just sometimes it's relatively easier than all the other ones. Given the fact that I only had one highly advantageous, my overall ranking is advantageous. I think it meets the requirements of the proposal. I don't think it extremely excels on any one criteria that would make me push it to advantageous or highly advantageous, but I think it meets the requirements of the proposal to be ranked as advantageous.
It was very simple. Every one of them were advantageous, and so my recommendation is advantageous.
Well, I only had one highly advantageous, so, and everything else was advantageous, so advantageous is my overall ranking.
Mine was, I averaged it out. So because I had 3 HAs and 1 A, I went with highly advantageous. And basically, I gave them credit for all the years they put into this is what I did. I still have, like I said, my only concerns, and has nothing to do with their proposal. Ken, you kind of cleared up a little bit about the environmental issue for me. I'm glad that was. My only concern is in the economy and the permitting environment. I think they're going to run into some unseen snags. So,
Yeah, I guess, numerically there, I had 2 highly advantageous, 3 advantageous. So although a few of those advantageous were right on the fence. So it ends up, I guess you could say, advantageous, but I'd add the comment that to me, it feels like this may end up as a whole in the advantageous category. And probably the biggest reason for that is, these folks haven't done it before, but, some guys named Franklin and Hamilton and Jefferson and Adams, never had started a country before they did it the first time either. So anyway, I have a high degree of confidence, but advantageous.
Okay, so the good thing is that there was none that were not acceptable, so we can have a discussion about whether we feel that the 5 of us as a whole have a consensus on whether we would like to make a recommendation for the selectmen to move forward in the process with consideration of awarding the lease to the Nantucket Hunting Association, or whether we want to think about our rankings based on these discussions and have another meeting to do that, or whatever the pleasure of the 5 of the other 4 people involved is.
right.
Chief.
I think I would make a motion that we forward it, a recommendation to accept it to the select board.
I will
Okay,
second that motion.
okay. Rick,
Aye.
Tucker,
Aye.
Ken,
Aye.
Chief Pittman,
Aye.
and I am an I as well. So I will, if you would send me your ranking sheets, I'll put them all together. I'll make one cover sheet with all of the recommendation, the rankings on it, and I will write up a memo to send to the town manager as a recommendation through the procurement office to the town manager to present to the select board that we have recommended that they move forward with the proposal for entering into a lease agreement with the Nantucket Hunting Association for a lease at the 1 Shadbush Road parcel of land. Does that pretty much summarize it for everyone? And I will circulate that memo before it's sent off to the town manager for inclusion and discussion with the select board or recommendation. Okay.
Good.
I certainly appreciate everyone's time in doing this. And so with that, I will say thank you. And I think we are finished our business at this point.
Okay.
Thanks, Brian.
All right. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. All right.
Thanks,
Bye
Brian.
now.